be speaking about Gaylord in southeast of St. Cloud. Anybody from that environment, by any chance? You raise your hand. I was from Sibley County, Mankato. Wow, everybody's off like that. Okay, Gaylord is, like I said, it's sort of southeast of St. Cloud area, about 30 minutes away from Glencoe, and northwest of New Ulm. Sort of a little snapshot of Gaylord. Gaylord is sort of one of the smaller cities in Minnesota. Population a little bit over 2,000. So it falls within those smaller range. And as I go, I will speak to you about why I chose Gaylord. Gaylord is one of 6 cities that I'm studying concerning issues of what I call colored spaces, and I will explain as I go along. But sort of to give you a sense of their downtown or the small town nature of the community. Some 2010 census information to sort of keep us in focus on why I chose the 6 communities that I'm studying. But specifically for this conference, I'm going to be speaking particularly about Gaylord. I think the same issues carries over to the other 6. The 6 communities are Cold Spring, Gaylord, Glencoe, Melrose, Shakopee, Wilmar. And if you note, their population range from 2,000 to about 4,000 to 5,000, with the exception of Shakopee, which I chose as an outlier, what we call as outliers in research. Essentially, although it has a larger population by a large urban center, but it has this sense of ruralness to it. So I wanted to use that to compare the smaller ones to see if the same trends I'm observing about where new immigrants are residing, where they make their homes in those small towns, if the same issues carries over to a community that is by a large urban center, as more or less a bedroom community, but at the same time retains a lot of its rural character. Likewise, the racial population distribution essentially also are relatively the same in terms of numbers. Okay, so you want to choose something that is like in research. You want to compare apples to apples, apples to oranges, essentially. But what I would like to point out is the population of the Latino community, especially in these communities. That is the larger new immigrant populations in these communities. They are overwhelmingly white, okay, with a sprinkle of other racial groups. We want to pay particular attention to the Latino population. As well as I'm going to give you guys a little bit about the 2010 census to see how either they've grown or reduced. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just looking at the numbers for the one community, and they don't make sense. If the total population is 2,305, there's 2020 white, and there's 530 Hispanic or Latino. Shouldn't the total population number be higher than it is?
Well, this is from the 2010 census. With the census, some people might check, their particular racial group, and then they don't check, some other information that get counted in. Okay. Yes.
But they also, at least in this initial analysis, some people who are Hispanic or Latino, it's a separate question. On the census, it's a different question. So are you Latino or Hispanic? Then they say, what race are you? And many of those people say they're white. And that's one reason that you get that.
But I think she's referring to...
She's talking about the totals, yeah. It doesn't, I understand your question. Yeah, in the 2010 census, because of how they have the racial distributions and how people respond to it, the numbers doesn't add up. Yeah, that's inherent in the census. Yes. And especially for my 195 class, this is an example of why sources are crucial. Citation. Okay. So, moving on. Okay. All right. So, you have the 2010 census here in percentages. However, I want to, call your attention to the state population. Okay, that is here in 2000, about 4 million. So overall, the state gained, a little bit over 1 million gained population. As you well know, we retained all our seats. Okay. Now, specifically now about Gala. 2009 estimated median household income is a little bit over 35,000. Now, I give you these numbers because they are important in informing how residential decisions are made. Where people can live and where people cannot live, etc. And I will, come back to these numbers in a minute. Now, this is a year behind because the census doesn't track the current year in terms of income. They track the year before. When you fill out your forms, that's usually what they go with. Was 39,000 in 2000. So we've kind of like lost a little bit of income as a state thanks to the economy. Minnesota averages about $55,000. The male population in the city, a little bit over 1,000. Female, a little bit over 1,000 also, but you have more female. Most of these towns are majority older people. As most of you already know, most of the small towns are having increases in retirees, baby boomer retirees. Unemployment as of 2010 is 7.5. So a little bit higher than the state average of 6.8%. Okay, a little bit more about the population in terms of this, the city compared to the 2010 census. So here I have 09 estimates, the actual in 2010, and then the county that the city is in. A little bit over 2,100 in 2009, ended up with 2,305 with the recent census. So they lost a little bit of population, and it will be interesting to note where those losses are. White alone in terms of racial distribution, 1855, 2010 census, 2020. So there's a net gain compared to the 209 estimates. With Latinos, 367, so there's a net loss, sorry, net gain in Latino population with 530. So, well over 30% gain. Asians, tiny little bit of gain. 2 or more races, overall gain. All the racial alone, 221. African Americans, there was none in 09, so there's a net 5 in 10. American Indian, and then Native and other Pacific Islanders. What kind of industries do these small towns hold in common? I'm specifically tracking places where new immigrants go to and why they go there when it comes to small towns. Why do they go to these small towns and what kind of industries, employment attracts them to those places. 2010 data, manufacturing. And manufacturing here is defined to include agri production, food. Okay. There are 20,000 employment industries specifically had food as a category. What interested me in many of these small towns is that they are predominantly agri-based industry. And that's what attracts a lot of these new immigrants to these communities for jobs. As most of you now live in urban areas, there's a need for younger workers in many of these small towns. Then agriculture in terms of farming, forestry, fishing and hunting, retail, and so on. Okay. So that's a lot as compared to the rest of the state. And that was for men. For women, for example, the healthcare industry is the primary employment sector. Then manufacturing, again, that includes food production, and then retail, administrative support, waste management services, and education. Now, to get to the residential pattern in Gaylord and what I find to be consistent in many of these small towns, again, like as I mentioned, the need for employment in these areas attracts many new immigrants in those areas. A question that occurred to me from a visit in 2008, I was part of a group of planners and architects that went to Gaylord to help them plan their future because they were increasingly losing younger and younger people in the community. So they wanted to re-strategize their vision and comprehensive plan, how they want to grow for the future. And it occurred to me that there are questions about, lack of housing. Many small towns don't necessarily have rental housing, like apartments or condos. You essentially have, single-family private residences. So it presents a challenge for a new set of people that moves to many of these small towns. Where do they live is a question. And many financial institutions are hesitant to invest in any new housing development in many of these small towns. So you have a dilemma. So where do these people live? What are their options, considering that many families, homes are in the family. So you don't have a situation where maybe you can rent a room or something like that. And this is, I'm stereotyping, again, many of these small towns because they are agriculturally based. But that's essentially the dilemma in these communities. So for Gaylord and the rest of these small towns, what you have available are manufactured homes, I think that's a fancy word for mobile homes, okay, that are put on a park setting. A park here being sort of a rented land. These mobile homes are set on there. So you have a situation where someone else owns the land and another person owns the actual mobile home itself. So you have two ownerships there at work. There are state laws about this sort of arrangement in terms of who has right of ownership or who has say on decision making.